They studied us through telescopes and called us weak. They listened to our transmissions and called us primitive. They watched us build cities of glass and war machines of steel and called it noise. And when they finally arrived, wrapped in divine silence and cloaked in technologies we could barely comprehend, they came not with diplomacy but with judgment. To them we were animals, curious, violent, disposable, but they misunderstood something no instrument could measure, something no probe could scan, not our strength, not our science, but our silence, because when their gods looked down at earth, they expected a species that would kneel. What they found was one that had already buried its fear, and when they tried to conquer us, we said nothing, not because we were broken, but because silence was the last thing you hear before the storm. They did not arrive with sound, not the thunder of engines, not the roar of weapons, not even the eerie tones of alien language breaking into our airwaves. They came in silence, the kind of silence that does not beg for attention but demands it. Astronomers first noticed it in early spring, 3 symmetrical voids eclipsing Saturn's rings, not solid objects, not meteors, just something that erased light, perfectly, deliberately, and then they moved slowly, impossibly, like watching continents drift across the sky. Governments noticed, space agencies went on silent alert, satellites realigned. By the time the world knew, it was already too late to call it first contact, because this wasn't contact. This was presence. The media spun it with desperate optimism. Intelligent visitors, they called them, peaceful observers, they hoped, diplomats prepared messages, religious leaders called for unity, people held their breath. But the silence never left, no response, no signal, no gesture, until the 4th day when the sky changed. All at once in 2 major cities around the globe, black pillars appeared, monoliths so perfectly symmetrical that they felt more like ideas than structures. They hovered 10 meters off the ground, no engines, no exhaust, no movement. They didn't glow, they didn't shimmer, they just existed, like punctuation at the end of a sentence we hadn't realized we were writing. For the first 12 hours there was no reaction. Then people began disappearing, not in explosions, not in chaos. They simply blinked out of existence. A mother pushing her stroller in Tokyo, a teacher giving a lecture in Nairobi, a child playing in Boston, gone, no pattern, no sound, no message, and no bodies. They weren't taken. They were removed, like edits from a story someone else was writing. Panic set in. Armies deployed tanks. Jets scrambled, but weapons passed through the pillars as if they weren't there. Rockets detonated with no effect. The world's most advanced arsenal meant nothing. Humanity had brought a hammer to a conversation with gods. And still the silence held. That's when a group known as the Archive made itself known, not a government agency, not a military alliance, but a clandestine group of historians, linguists, rogue scientists, and deep-time archaeologists. People who had long suspected that Earth's myths held more than metaphor, that visitations weren't a question of if, but when. They had seen patterns the rest of the world dismissed, triangular shapes in cave paintings dated 30,000 years before writing, identical symbols carved into Sumerian temples and Mayan ziggurats, star alignments in dead languages that pointed not to gods but to watchers, and all of them matched what now floated in our skies. Through fragmented transmissions and enhanced analysis, the Archive gave it a name, the Judgment Protocol, a system, not a species. These visitors weren't here to invade, they were here to evaluate. Earth, it seemed, was not the first to receive their silence. Other civilizations had risen and vanished under their gaze. Their method was always the same: appear, observe, erase, but only if the planet failed their test. A test of what? Not technology, not intelligence, but something deeper, something moral. The protocol measured restraint, empathy, unity under pressure, and the Archive's conclusion was terrifying. We had already failed. Because these gods, if that's what they were, had not just arrived. They had been watching us long before the first pillar appeared, our wars, our hate, our tribalism disguised as patriotism, our division disguised as freedom. It wasn't our violence that doomed us, it was how proudly we wore it, how eagerly we televised it, how willingly we let fear shape our leaders, and the pillars weren't here to change us, they were here to end the experiment. What came next was not chaos, it was something far worse: control. Weather patterns began shifting without explanation. Animals migrated away from cities as if sensing some ancient predator. Dreams were no longer private. Millions reported the same recurring nightmare of a great white chamber, where a black figure sat on a throne made of stars, and every word you tried to speak turned to ash in your mouth. Psychologists called it a shared trauma response. The archive called it the beginning of Phase 2, and then, buried deep beneath the ice sheets of Antarctica, a signal activated. It didn't go up to the sky. It went down, a pulse through the Earth's crust, a frequency older than any civilization, carved into the planet like a scar. It wasn't human-made, it wasn't alien, it was, pre-language, a final fail-safe. And the archive's translation, run through quantum linguistics and neural ancestry mapping, offered only 2 phrases: speak nothing, feel everything. Not advice, not poetry, a directive, a survival protocol. One Earth had no idea it possessed. Governments tried to dismiss it. The public laughed at it. But then something strange happened. Cities that went dark not from power failure, but from silence were spared. No one taken, no one erased. People in those places stopped filming, stopped speaking. They waited, and the pillars watched, and so did the gods. The signal wasn't just a warning, it was a key, a way of becoming invisible to judgment. A way of telling the universe, we understand, we will not scream, we will not beg, we will wait, not because we are afraid, but because silence now is the loudest thing we have left. And as the archive looked back through history at the deserts where empires crumbled and the forests where civilizations vanished, they began to wonder, maybe we weren't the first to hear the signal. But we might be the first to finally listen. The name came from the archive's decrypted files, buried deep within their oldest recovered codebooks, not from Earth, but from ruins beneath the sands of Algeria and the basalt tunnels of Antarctica. Judgment Protocol, those 2 words changed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding between species. It wasn't a failed communication. It wasn't even a war. It was a sentence, a test Earth had not applied for. A scale upon which our species had been placed without consent, without preparation, and worst of all, without time. The gods weren't speaking to us because our trial was already in progress. We were not the first. We would not be the last, but we were the loudest, the noisiest, the most proud, the most volatile, and now we were being weighed across the planet. Experts scrambled to understand what the protocol truly meant. It was not coded in commands or languages. It was enforced by presence, by consequence. The pillars that hovered above cities weren't tools, they were sensors, monuments to unblinking truth. Every act of violence was registered. Every lie broadcast through media. Every emotional rupture amplified by algorithm. It was like feeding a superintelligence with our worst impulses. Some thought if we displayed goodness, acts of kindness, unity, global peace movements, perhaps we could sway the outcome. But the archive knew better. This wasn't about redemption. It was about pattern, and Earth's pattern had already been recorded. The pillars weren't observing change. They were observing confirmation. Phase 2 began on the 7th day, not with destruction, but with withdrawal. Banks collapsed. The internet fractured. Satellites began to fall from the sky, not in flames, but gently as if some unseen force had simply unhooked them from orbit. Surveillance systems blinked out. Phones stopped working. For the first time in the digital age, Earth was deaf. But the silence was intentional, a global blindfold, because the judgment protocol had moved beyond observation. It was now preparing for a verdict, and then the disappearances began again, but this time not at random. Entire villages vanished. Remote communities in Siberia, indigenous tribes in the Amazon, fishing towns in the Arctic. Gone, no signs of struggle, no destruction, just absence, as if history had forgotten them overnight. But the patterns revealed something more horrifying. These were the most disconnected people on Earth, the ones least involved in the global system. Least responsible for our noise, least guilty, and yet they were taken first. Why, that question echoed through every news outlet, every surviving broadcast, and the archive offered only one explanation. The protocol was not punishing behavior. It was purging unpredictability. Anyone who could not be measured, who lived outside data, Outside signal was considered noise, anomalies, the first to go. The world broke into three factions. The screamers, those who fought, who believed resistance was the only answer, who launched missiles at the pillars despite knowing they would fail. Their governments collapsed within days. The bargainers, those who tried to appease the gods, who built altars, broadcast pleas for mercy, uploaded libraries of human achievement into the cloud, hoping someone, something, was listening. And then the silent, the ones who had heard the phrase, who believed in the signal, who turned off their lights, destroyed their devices, and vanished into silence. Among them was her, no name, no title. Just a mother. Her child had been taken on the first day. In front of her, no scream, no chance, just gone. She had not spoken since, not a word, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Somehow, she had heard the signal more clearly than anyone. She moved from region to region, leaving no trace, warning others with nothing more than a look. People began following her, protecting her, calling her the signal bearer. The archive picked up her trail but chose not to interfere. Because something about her changed the data, in areas where she stayed, the pillars lingered longer, but no one disappeared. It was as if her silence was louder than their technology. The judgment protocol continued to escalate. Earthquakes began, precise, targeted, and unnatural, not tectonic but harmonic. As if the ground was being tuned, oceans shifted, entire coastlines vanished beneath new tides, and then, perhaps the most terrifying sign, the sky itself dimmed. Not just at night, even in daylight, the blue turned to ash, as if a great filter had been placed between the earth and the sun. Photosynthesis slowed, crops died, livestock refused to eat, the planet wasn't being attacked. It was being muted. Then came the second vision. Millions saw it. The black throne again, but this time the figure stood. Its body was not alien, not truly. It was shifting, familiar, human, like but wrong. And when it raised its arm, everyone felt the same sensation. Disappointment, not hatred, not anger, just, quiet, immense disappointment, the kind a parent might feel for a child who should have known better. And with it came a single word burned into every mind simultaneously: finalization. The archive's quantum linguists decoded it. The protocol had reached its third stage. Humanity's silence or lack of it would now decide its fate. And deep beneath the earth's mantle, the ancient signal pulsed one final time. Speak nothing, feel everything. The countdown had begun. When the word finalization spread across the minds of every human being, it did not echo like a warning. It fell like a verdict, a cold, unblinking declaration from a species or force that had long stopped believing humanity could course. Correct, but not everyone heard it the same way. In the megacities still blinking under the fractured grid, it triggered panic. Protests turned into riots. In the capitals where governments had tried to appease the pillars, entire ministries collapsed overnight. Civilians begged for guidance, for answers, but there were none. No voice, no face, just the black shapes in the sky watching, still unmoving, still impossibly silent, but in the regions that had already chosen quiet, something else was happening. They were calling them the silent cities, places that had disconnected completely, no phones, no broadcasts, no generators humming in the night, towns where windows were shuttered, roads empty, and every human interaction reduced to simple, wordless signals. Children learned not to cry, dogs stopped barking. It was as if silence had passed from ritual into instinct. In those places, the pillars stayed longer and did nothing. They hovered, flickered, pulsed faintly, and then slowly receded. Those who watched from satellite sweeps noticed a pattern. The more a region resisted the urge to speak, to plead, to perform, to panic, the less interference it faced. And from these growing havens of quiet emerged a name spoken in hushed reverence. A myth, perhaps, a leader, maybe, a symbol, certainly, the signal bearer, the woman who had lost her child on the first day. She had not spoken since, had not written, had not gestured wildly. She simply walked barefoot across cities in collapse, wearing only a long gray coat, her face veiled, and people followed, not like worshippers, like listeners. She would enter a city, pause at its center, and sit. And within hours the city itself would begin to mute. Radios turned off, voices dropped to whispers. No orders were given, it just happened, and for as long as she remained, the black pillars above would not erase a single soul. The archive noticed, They tracked her movements not with drones, those failed, but with observers who used only pen and paper. Whenever someone tried to document her electronically, the equipment would fail. Batteries drained, memory wiped, but analog records survived. Sketches, descriptions, old-fashioned journals, as if whatever power she had was allergic to modernity. And the archive began to realize this was not about technology. This was about vibration, about resonance, about a planetary frequency that had been buried beneath all our noise for thousands of years. The silent cities began to connect, not with networks, with rituals. Smoke signals, light patterns, even migratory birds trained to carry symbols carved into bone. Humanity, in its darkest hour, rediscovered its most ancient tools. And in the silence, something strange occurred. The earth responded. Animals that had fled cities began returning to these quiet enclaves. Trees that had stopped blooming burst again with color. Rain fell only on those regions, as if the sky itself was watching too. For the first time since the pillars arrived, hope did not come from governments or weapons or codes. It came from the sound of nothing, but not everyone was willing to follow. In the last remaining capitals, the screamers consolidated. Malicious technocrats, even remnants of state militaries, they believed the silent cities were surrendering to the enemy, that silence was cowardice, that humanity must prove itself worthy through resistance. Through dominance, they deployed atmospheric disruptors, fired megasonic barrages at the pillars, used synthetic minds to simulate divine, level AI thought patterns in hopes of meeting the enemy, but the pillars didn't flinch. They didn't even respond, and then the final line was crossed. One of the silent cities, a small, forest-ringed community in western Norway, was attacked, not by aliens, by humans. A splinter group of screamers stormed the settlement, demanding compliance, trying to liberate those who had chosen quiet. They brought drones, weapons, floodlights. The people did not resist. They simply stood in stillness, no fight, no screams, but that was when the air changed. Every eyewitness who survived claimed it happened in under 3 seconds. A pulse low, deep, and ancient rolled through the trees. The invaders fell silent, not by choice. Their mouths froze mid-shout, their bodies locked, their tech failed, and the black pillar above the city pulsed once a dull, almost mournful throb, and then lowered. Just a few meters, just enough for its base to kiss the earth. Everything inside a 20-kilometer radius turned white, not fire, not destruction, just light. When it faded, the city was untouched. The attackers were gone, no blood, no smoke, just a whisper left behind, carved into the bark of every tree, translated by the archive's oldest linguistic AI. To fight the silence is to betray the signal. That message rippled across the globe like thunder without sound. Suddenly millions understood. The judgment protocol was not testing our strength. It was testing our noise, our hunger to be heard, to dominate the air, to demand, to fill every quiet space with ourselves. And now Earth's only defense was not resistance. It was surrender not of freedom, but of ego, of noise. The silent cities swelled in number, and at their heart the woman walked still, the signal bearer. Her silence had become legend, but her path was not yet finished, because the archive had discovered something buried beneath her trail, a map, not drawn, not spoken, remembered, and what it led to was not a place. It was the last decision humanity would ever be allowed to make. The map was never drawn, not on paper, not in code. It was not a diagram that could be photographed, uploaded, or decoded by algorithm. It was passed through silence, not between mouths, but through something older, ancestral instinct, the kind of memory that predates civilization, language, even identity. It began with the signal bearer. Wherever she stepped, certain people dreamed of places they had never seen. They would wake up and draw spirals in the dirt, arrange stones in strange patterns, or simply walk for days without knowing why until they stood on the edge of something ancient and buried. The archive watched this unfold in stunned disbelief. Individuals from opposite corners of the globe, no shared language, no connection, moving in concert toward a single destination, as if the earth itself had whispered directions into the quiet parts of their minds. A planetary instinct unlocked only by silence. The archive called it the signal trail, not a road, a resonance, a buried frequency, hidden beneath fault lines and magnetic flows, dormant for millennia. When humanity was loud, it stayed asleep, but now in silence it pulsed. The archive used Earth scanners to track the pattern. It formed no clear shape, not a star, not a spiral, something messier. Something imperfect, a fingerprint, not of a species of a test. Every location the dreamers converged on was part of this larger pattern. The deserts of Sudan, the salt flats of Bolivia, the hollow forests of Siberia. Each one carried identical stone arrangements, 8 vertical pillars surrounding a circular basin, precisely 44 meters in diameter, not natural, not new, not human, and when people stood in that basin and closed their eyes, they heard it the tone. Low, deep, alive, it wasn't music. It was emotion made physical, a hum that pressed against your ribs and crawled into your lungs. It made some weep, some kneel, a few simply collapsed, their hearts unable to bear the weight of something so ancient and true. It was not dangerous, but it was overwhelming. The archive began calling these places signal wells. Wells because they were not sources, but collectors, receptors, microphones for the planet. Humanity, it seemed, was never the only thing being listened to. The earth itself had been trying to speak, but only now, in the vacuum of silence, could anyone hear it. One signal well in particular began glowing faint at first, then brighter with each passing day. It lay in the ruins of an old mountain monastery in Tibet, abandoned since the 14th century. The signal bearer arrived there on foot, no convoy, no protection, just a child's necklace in her hand, the last thing she had before her son was erased. She stood at the center of the well, surrounded by thousands who had walked behind her for weeks, some barefoot, some sick, all silent. And when she stepped into the center, the basin reacted. It did not erupt. It did not shine. It simply vibrated a harmonic that spread across tectonic plates into the sea, into the atmosphere. The black pillars above cities trembled, not from weakness, from attention. They had noticed. Satellites, still barely operational, picked up a pattern. The pillars had realigned, slightly, not toward her, but toward the earth beneath her. The archive traced the triangulation. It pointed to a single point beneath the Himalayan crust. A cave buried 2 miles beneath glacial stone, previously undetectable, now radiating with that same low harmonic. It was not alien, it was not human, it was a voice. The archive dispatched a team, no drones. No tech, just people trained, silent, and ready. They moved carefully, knowing that even a single wrong signal might shatter the fragile peace silence had bought. After days of descent, they reached it. A chamber perfectly round, cut into the rock as if by thought, not tool. At its center stood a statue humanoid, but alien in detail. Elongated limbs, starburst-shaped eyes, hands held outward, not in threat. Not in prayer, in offering. The walls were etched in thousands of languages, many known, many dead, some never recorded, but each contained the same idea. The ones who listen will be spared. It was not a threat. It was a memory who carved it, when the archive could not say. But one theory began to surface, whispered only in their most protected circles, that this planet was not just a place of life. It was a place of witness. That Earth was not being judged in isolation, but as part of something much older, that long before humanity crawled into speech, something else had screamed and been erased, that the judgment protocol had been here before. And that last time, no one listened. The chamber contained one more thing, a pedestal, upon it a sphere, blacker than night, not metal, not stone, just black. When the team approached, one of them reached out and collapsed. No wounds, no trauma, just silence, not death, not unconsciousness, as if their signal had been muted. Forever, the team retreated, carefully, respectfully. They left the chamber as they found it. But they took the message back to the world. Silence is not surrender. It is the password, the signal. Bearer did not enter the cave. She remained at the surface, waiting, because she knew what came next was not to be found underground. It would arrive from above, because Earth had made its answer, and now the gods would speak. The first sound came not from the sky, but from the oceans. It was not a voice, not words. It was resonance like a memory of thunder buried beneath the seabed. Sonar stations across the Pacific lit up like heart monitors at the moment of cardiac arrest. Submarines went dark. Whales changed their migration paths and never came back. Coral reefs shimmered under the midnight surface with colors no eye had catalogued before. But the sound was not heard in decibels. It was felt. Across every shore on Earth, people woke in the middle of the night with their palms pressed to the ground. their breath caught in their throats, and tears rising for reasons they could not name. Some knelt, some wept, some stood completely still and simply listened, because deep down, every living thing recognized the voice of something older than survival, older than language, older than the concept of alien. It was not a visitation. It was a confirmation. The gods, if that was the word we were still using, had acknowledged our silence. Above the Himalayas, where the signal bearer stood beneath the stars, a single black pillar began to descend. Slowly, without sound, its edges rippled like heat distortion against the fabric of reality. Around it, the air crystallized, bending light unnaturally, and then, without warning, it stopped hovering just a few meters above the earth. Every device in the region died instantly, batteries drained, satellites blinked out, even wristwatches froze. Time itself, it seemed, refused to move while the pillar hovered, and then came the second resonance, sharper, more precise. This time it came from the sky. It split the clouds with a spiral of silent lightning, a perfect helix of violet and gold arcing from the stratosphere, wrapping itself around the descending pillar like a rope spun from stars. And at the center of that spiral they saw it, not a ship, not a weapon, not even a being, a presence. It shimmered like liquid shadow, no form, no eyes, no voice, but everyone felt it in their bones. In their lungs, in their oldest fears. It was not angry, it was not kind, it was inevitable. The archive, still watching from afar, translated the ripple in the data fields. It was not a message, it was a question. "Are you done speaking?" No lips moved, no sound carried across the sky, but the question was there, broadcast not in sound but in certainty, like the end of a sentence carved into the soul of the world. And the signal bearer, without lifting her head, without raising her hand, simply remained still. It was enough. The pillar pulsed once, and every remaining pillar on earth vanished, not rose, not flew, not retreated, vanished. In a single breath, humanity was alone again. But it was not the end, because from the deep sea, something else rose, not metal, not monolithic. It looked like stone, but it wasn't. It looked like a temple, but it wasn't. It was the first machine. The archive called it the listener, a structure older than our pyramids, older than our myths, taller than any skyscraper, but covered in inscriptions that seemed to shift depending on who looked. It breached the surface gently, like a whale greeting the air for the first time in centuries, and once it stood fully above the waves it sang, no words, no melody, just a low, vibrating tone that shook tectonic plates and soothed the human heart. Across the world, survivors dropped their weapons, riots stopped, prayers fell silent. For one unified moment in history, humanity simply listened, and then the sky cracked, not like thunder, like fabric. The archive had no words for it. Astronomers could not measure it. The edge of the visible universe, the one we had always seen as infinite folded like paper, a crease opened in the black, and from it emerged something we had no right to witness. A vessel not flying, not shimmering, unfolding. It did not arrive. It was revealed. The stars themselves dimmed as it emerged, miles wide, covered in patterns that made human geometry seem like child's play. Its motion was not physical. It moved like thought. It moved like memory. And as it hovered in the exosphere above Earth's breath, every human being received the same vision, a field of planets burning. Thousands of civilizations, some older than time, reduced to ash, and at the center of it all, one constant noise. Every species before us had made the same mistake. They screamed to be noticed. They begged to be judged. They demanded to be heard, and the gods or the force that measured them had only one answer: silence, not destruction, muting, entire galaxies erased from memory, not because they were evil, not because they were violent, but because they were loud. Humanity had stood at that edge too, but something changed, a mother, a silence, a map etched in memory, and now the vessel above Earth waited. It did not prepare to strike. It prepared to speak, but only if we remained quiet enough to hear it. And in that moment, the fate of Earth depended not on our power, not on our innovation, not on our defiance, but on our ability to listen. And she, the signal bearer, stepped forward. Her silence had carried us this far. Now her stillness would carry us further, because the gods were not here to destroy us. They were here to see if we had learned. They had measured our noise, not our strength, not our speed, not the sharpness of our weapons or the size of our cities. They had studied our vibration, our hunger to be heard. For thousands of years we mistook it as ambition, as passion, as progress, but to them, to whatever intelligence now loomed above the sky like a memory of gravity itself, it was a contagion, the sound of a species too loud to hear anything but itself. The prior civilizations shown to us in dream flashes had not fallen because of weakness. They had vanished because they tried to outshout the silence. We were about to do the same until one woman lost her son, and chose not to scream. The vessel still hovered above the exosphere, not descending, not probing, not speaking, waiting, watching, measuring, but it was no longer looking at our machines or our cities. It was watching the woman, the signal bearer, not with scanners, not with light, but with something deeper, resonance. Her silence had become a symbol, yes, but it had also become a language, and now the time had come to speak in it. The listener, the temple-like structure that had risen from the depths, began to shift, its surface plates reconfigured, opening slowly like petals of a stone flower, not revealing a core, but forming a shape, one not of alien origin, but unmistakably human. A silhouette, feminine, standing still, arms extended, head bowed, and as the petals locked into place, that silent statue turned ever so slightly to face the signal bearer. All across the globe, translators scrambled. AI linguistic models burned through data trying to interpret the meaning. Was it mimicry, a threat, a test? But the signal bearer didn't move. She simply stepped forward, one slow pace into the shadow of the listener. And then she knelt. She did not bow. She did not surrender. She honored, and that single act of reverent stillness echoed across the pillars of the planet. The listener responded, not with speech, not with light, but with mirroring. The statue shape mimicked her movement, kneeling in turn, hands pressed against the Earth's crust. And in that instant, all seismic activity stopped. Every volcano, every fault line, every shifting tectonic plate paused. Silence wasn't just a choice. It was now a communication protocol. The archive realized it, then not every species had failed the judgment protocol. Some had passed, few, forgotten, but they had survived by adapting not their technology, not their defenses, but their languages. They had learned to speak without sound, without disruption, without insistence, and now Earth was being offered the same path, but there was a cost. The archive, through its recovered glyphs in the Tibetan cave and the base of the listener, began to translate a chilling truth. To complete the dialogue, humanity would have to abandon all artificial signal emission for the next 44 years. No broadcasts, no satellites, no transmissions, no internet, no digital voice. A complete planetary vow of silence. If we refused, the vessel above would vanish not in retreat but in verdict. Our frequency would be marked, our signal archived, and when the next pass occurred, whether in a year, a decade, or an eon, the judgment would be carried out without ceremony. Permanent muting, the word sat like ice in the gut of every leader who read it. No explosion, no invasion, just forgetting, erasure from the cosmic memory. The planet would remain, the trees would grow. But every trace of us, even the memory of us, would be stripped from the harmonic lattice that connected intelligent life. No legacy, no echo, just silence. The archive assembled Earth's last council. Not politicians, not CEO, listeners, linguists, memory historians, indigenous elders, monks, deaf poets, people who understood that meaning could exist beyond speech. For the first time in human history, the planet did not gather its strongest or loudest to decide its future, it gathered its quietest. And their answer, drafted not in speech but in gesture, was delivered through the only person they believed could carry it. The signal bearer, she approached the listener once more. She carried nothing, no tablet, no scroll, only a small hand, carved object, a wooden toy her son had once loved. She laid it at the base of the silent statue, then stepped back, and finally she looked up, not at the listener, not at the sky, at the vessel, and in that moment, with a gaze unblinking, unyielding, she offered humanity's final message. She said nothing, but the silence thundered across the earth, because for the first time in history we had heard ourselves, and what we heard was worth preserving. The world did not go quiet all at once. Silence is not something that can be legislated or enforced. It must be understood, accepted, and then, when it has passed through grief and doubt and fear, it must be chosen. In the hours after the signal, Bearer laid the wooden toy at the feet of the listener and lifted her eyes to the waiting gods above. A pulse circled the earth, not one of light, not of destruction, but of invitation. Every active satellite received it, every remaining broadcast station. It was not a shutdown, it was a final question, one more chance to choose noise, one more chance to be loud, and one by one the signals stopped. The archive called it the Great Disconnect. Within 72 hours the skies above Earth became dark, not from clouds, not from war, but from the absence of artificial constellations. The satellites, still intact, went into sleep. The internet fell silent, airwaves cleared. Digital silence, once unimaginable, became the loudest sound the planet had ever made. There was no announcement, no farewell transmission. The last message sent from Earth's unified signal was a simple gesture. A woman's face looking up, and behind her the whole world standing in stillness. For a generation raised on noise, the silence was terrifying. People wept in their living rooms, unable to hear music that had played since birth. Cities sounded different, empty, without sounding abandoned. No horns, no engines, no electronic murmurs. Even the birds, as if sensing the shift in frequency, flew lower, slower, as if waiting to see if this new quiet was real. And across it all, the vessel, that impossible structure hanging beyond the clouds, remained, watching, listening, the signal. Bearer did not return to her home. She was not taken into a palace. She was not made queen. She simply walked across countries, across oceans, no transport, no announcement, no destination, and wherever she passed, people followed, not with questions, not with chants, but with steps. Whole villages walked behind her barefoot. Cities emptied into the wilderness, and as she moved, the earth, as if recognizing the path, began to awaken. In the Sahara, ancient stones lifted from the sand, not by machine, but as if drawn toward her gravity. In Siberia, glaciers cracked and revealed metallic vines humming with power. In the forests of South America, the trees themselves bent gently, forming living archways through which she passed. The planet was not waiting for its saviors to build. It was waiting for its people to listen, and listen they did, but the silence was not equal for all. In the bunkers of failed nations and broken regimes, remnants of old power still whispered. Secret signals still flickered beneath mountains, testing the gods, whispering defiance, and so it happened. In the space above Iran, one transmission flared a test missile, not aimed at the vessel, not hostile, but audible. The reaction was instant, not from the gods. From Earth, the listener, still perched in the Pacific, pulsed once. The wave struck the atmosphere in silence. The missile dissolved mid-air, as if erased not from space, but from memory, and then came the second pulse. It did not strike a military base. It struck the underground bunker where the signal originated. No explosion, no fire, just dust and silence. From that moment, Earth policed itself, not with soldiers, not with fear, but with shame. To break the silence was not to betray the gods. It was to betray Earth. A new kind of civilization began to form. The archive transformed into the custodians. They did not rule. They remembered. Their job was to hold the silence, teach its meaning, and remind those born after the disconnect that their voices were sacred and to be used only when invited. Without radio, without broadcast, Earth rediscovered old ways of sharing. Gestures, symbols, art. The sky became a canvas for signal. Kite's giant visual glyphs painted across the stratosphere using harmless weather drones, not to communicate with each other, but to show the gods we were trying. And still the vessel watched. It never moved, never spoke, never struck, but every year, on the same day the silence began, it pulsed once, a heartbeat, and below, Earth answered, not with words, but with stillness. As if to say, we are here, we are learning, we are ready. The signal. Bearer grew older. She never stopped walking. Her hair grayed, her pace slowed, but still she moved, and still the world moved with her. To see her once in your life became a sacred rite. Some called her a prophet, some a teacher, but most simply called her Mother Silence. Children born after the disconnect grew up never hearing a ringtone, never seeing a television. They learned to read expressions before they learned to read books. They danced in fields instead of watching screens, and yet they were not primitive. They were not backward. Their minds were sharper, their eyes clearer, their intuition deeper, because they were born not in the age of noise but in the age of listening, and so Earth became a living signal, not to shout across the stars, but to be heard when the time was right, because something was changing in the sky. The vessel was dimming. Its patterns, once brilliant, were slowing. The archive began to sense that the gods were preparing something. A final message, or perhaps an arrival, but the Earth did not panic. The people did not scream, they simply watched and waited, because now at last we understood. No one ran, no one shouted, no missiles rose. No sirens cried. When the vessel above Earth finally moved, humanity for the first time in its long, violent, grieving history did not meet the unknown with fear. It met it with stillness. The skies did not crack open. The oceans did not boil. It began as a shimmer, a fold in the very notion of distance, and then the impossible machine that had hovered in the silence above Earth for 17 years began to unfold. Its petals, if they could be called that, unwrapped not in haste but in ritual. Layer by layer, orbit by orbit, the ship opened like a memory that had waited eons to be recalled. What emerged from within was not a fleet, not a king, not weapons or warriors. It was reflection, a mirror, not of glass, not of steel, but of presence itself, a field of bending light and harmonic sound, shaped into a figure neither entirely alien nor entirely human. A hybrid. It had no face, and yet everyone who saw it felt seen. It had no voice, and yet every person on Earth felt their name rise gently in their chest like a lost lullaby. Children clutched the hands of parents. Elders fell to their knees in gardens and temples. The silence did not end, it deepened, thickened, became sacred, and in the middle of it, from the base of the listener's still half-sub, merged in the Pacific, the signal bearer stood, her hands unclenched for the first time in decades. She did not smile, she did not cry, she simply breathed, and the Earth held its breath with her. The hybrid, being the mirror form, as the archive would later name it, descended not to cities or capitals, but to the same field where she had once laid the toy of her lost son. The wooden horse, worn and cracked by time and wind, was still there, untouched. The grass around it had never grown, the soil beneath had never shifted. The world had protected the symbol because it understood now this was not a monument to grief. It was a key, a contract, a whisper the gods had heard. The mirror form did not land, it did not walk. It approached in vibration, not through the air, but through the memory of air. Every step was a note in a song older than language. And when it stood before her, it bowed, not in superiority, not in reverence, but in equality, a being older than stars, bending to the quietest Mother Earth had ever known. And she, Mother Silence, stepped forward and placed her hand not on its face, but in the space where its heart would have been, and the Earth changed, not all at once, not in fire, but in memory. People across the planet felt it a surge not through nerves, but through the marrow of history. Visions, generations unfolding in reverse, not their own but others. Civilizations that had learned silence, worlds that had failed, voices that had broken the code, and one that remained with us. A planet forgotten, not for punishment but for protection. A world once filled with noise, now returned to quiet. And from that world the mirror form had come not as a god, not as a judge, but as a survivor. The message was clear: you are ready, not to join them, not to follow, but to begin. Begin what? That was the question every mind on Earth asked in the same moment, and the answer came not in words, but in motion. The listener pulsed again. 12 points on the Earth lit up. Ancient structures once dismissed as myth beneath the ice of Antarctica, under the stone of Machu Picchu, beneath the Black Pyramid of Alaska activated. Not weapons, not ships, keys, and with those keys came sound, not from the gods, from the Earth. Tones rose from the sea, from the roots of trees, from the heartbeats of whales, from the breath of monks who had held it for lifetimes. The world, our world, had always held the code, and now we could hear it, we could understand it. The gods had not come to teach us their way, they had come to see if we could remember our own. The mirror form turned not to the stars, but to the soil. And where it pointed, forests grew instantly, whole valleys bloomed in minutes. Deserts drank and bloomed, ice melted into rivers that sang, and people did not cheer, they wept. Because in their silence they had finally heard the one truth no god had ever spoken aloud. Earth had never needed saving, it had needed space to heal, and now it had healed us. The final act came not with fanfare, but with goodbye. The mirror form placed its hand upon the wooden horse, and from it a seed of light rose. It floated into the air, then upward higher, until it vanished into the chest of the vessel. The petals closed again, not in rejection, but in completion, and as the vessel turned, something astonishing happened. It left the toy behind, restored, whole, as if the gods had carried it, loved it, remembered it, and now gave it back. The signal bearer picked it up. For the first time in decades, she smiled, and then she turned not to the sky, but to us, to the millions watching in fields, on rooftops, on mountain peaks, and she spoke just 2 words, soft, steady, final: begin listening. The vessel vanished, the sky cleared, and Earth, for the first time in recorded history, did not celebrate. It breathed because now it had been heard, and what lay ahead was not conquest, not alliance, but becoming, and so the sky emptied. The gods left not in triumph, not in judgment, but in silence, the same silence we had offered them. Their vessel vanished without sound, without trail, without thunder, and the world did not fill the void with noise, because something had shifted forever. Our children would never know what it meant to scream into the dark and expect a reply. They would not be raised to fear the stars. They would not inherit the madness of trying to outshout the universe. Instead, they would inherit something older, something sacred, a new language not of mouths or machines, but of stillness, of listening, of presence. We did not become more advanced, we became more awake, and in the stillness left behind, in the forests reborn and the oceans rebalanced, Earth began to speak for the first time in 10,000 years. We had been called primitive, but when we stopped shouting, when we finally listened, even the gods paused to hear us, and from that day forward, humanity never whispered again, because now the stars were listening.